Welcome to the Man Up God's Way podcast, a show that dives into the real, raw, and relevant issues for men and their faith, life, and community. Now, your host, Jody Burkeen.
All right, guys, here we are again on another Monday night. My name is Jody Burkeen. I am the host of the Man Up God's Way podcast and the founder as well. And we want to welcome you. If you get an opportunity, if you would, just share this podcast with everybody on your friends list, if you would. It would be awesome for us to reach more and more people for the sake of the gospel and for great conversation as we have every week on this podcast. We've been doing this now for almost going on our 11th month and our 41st podcast, and we're really excited tonight. Got a great guest who we'll introduce here in just a second. But if you get an opportunity, again, please share this with all your social media friends and as much as possible. It helps us out. And I've got Fregosa today in the studios. How you doing, brother?
What's up, man?
You staying out of trouble?
Always.
Good. How was your week? I should say.
Weekend, man. The weekend is short because I work on Sundays, so I get done with church probably around 1 o'clock, and my weekend is a few hours before Monday hits, and here I am. Yeah, so I hit it running, and I need to do a better job of getting a Sabbath. I think we talked about that a few months ago, but I'm failing miserably.
So I started at Mondays on again back. I had been doing Mondays as my Sabbath for a long time, and I finally got back into it because I was building that house for a customer. So I do that on the side and do some construction on the side, and I was doing that for almost a year, and I just couldn't get that Monday squared away, and so finally I got my Mondays back. So
that's awesome.
I'm glad to have that. So tell us a little bit about some things that are going on here at Man Up God's Way.
So as always, we just kind of just plug the books every week. We got Man Up, Becoming a Godly Man in an Ungodly World. This was numero uno. And then your second book, Pursuit of a Godly Life, Living Like Jesus Matters.
There we go.
Nailed it. We always have Man Up gear. You can go on the Man Up website. You can get merch. I'm clearly not wearing any merch today. I have a day job. They're not paying for this, dude. Hold on. Let me cover up the sponsorship. You're gonna have to pay some dollar bills for this. Yeah, I got a day job, but I need to give me some Man Up merch so I can make a wardrobe change in between my chaotic Mondays. But go on there. manupgodsway.com, and you can grab coffee mugs. You can grab our coffee, our literal coffee. We got some beans you can chop up, roast, and drink. That's what we got. We got baseball caps. We got we have an app.
Check the app out.
Check the app out. That's actually how we fund some of this. So the app does have a cost to it. It's a space outside of social media that we can post, not be regulated, not be, shadow banned. I know we were talking before the show started on our viewership. We're just under 100,000 downloads for Man Up. We're coming up on the end of 2023. We should reach that 100,000 downloads before the end of the year pretty easily.
And we should be at 100,000 a week with 800,000 followers on Facebook. But
we were when we started.
Yeah, they're shadow banning us big time nowadays. So
we were slamming. We were cooking pretty hot the first 3 months.
Yeah.
And then we drastically dropped. They were on to us.
Yeah.
And so, but it's a slow, steady climb, and all good things. We're not complaining. We're excited about where we're at. And 2023 is coming in hot. We actually were talking about booking for 2023. So I made a video before we started that I'll post on my social here coming up. But we are booked through mid-January right now. And we are starting to reach out to people and looking for some guests for 2023. So if you're out there and you have a book, you have a cause, you have a ministry, and you would like to reach out to us, please do so. And we'll try to get connected, and we'll see if you're a good fit for the show. And
awesome. I appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much. Well, folks, I'm like I said, I'm excited and about our guest tonight, and He's a pastor, Pastor Brad, and you're going to have to help me pronounce your last name. Is it Hoffs?
You're close. It's
Oh.
Hafs.
Hafs. Okay, my bad, brother.
And OE like in Schrader.
Okay.
We were using Siri. We had Siri read it to us out loud, and that's what she gave us. So we can lay it on her.
All right. All right. Well, Pastor Brad, I'm excited, like I said earlier, to have you on here. I've been talking for the past couple of years about a lot of problems. You know, we had the COVID shutdown. We had the pandemic, or the scaredemic, or the plandemic, or whatever you want to call it. We had mass chaos, mass fear. We've had financial issues, crisis. And I've been saying for, if not years, at least a year or so, I don't think we've seen the major problems from the pandemic yet. And what I mean by that is I think mentally, emotionally, that we're seeing people that are just completely burnt out, worn out, hopeless. I've never seen in my life a society that is so hopeless. We've got a generation of what I would call kids. I mean, they might be young adults, but that are coming up that are just, I mean, almost crazy. And I'm glad to have you on here tonight, is my point, because I know that with your ministry called Fresh Hope, that you are trying your best to help deal with this, and trying to bring people together to understand what's going on emotionally and spiritually and physically and mentally, and you're doing it all through a biblical mindset. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that? First of all, let's start off with yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, sure. First of all, I'm glad to be here, and I've never thought of myself manning up, so maybe tonight I'll man up. My wife will say, "Suck it up, Buttercup. It's time to man up." Well, I've been married 43 years, been a pastor for 38 years. I almost said 38,000 years.
It's kind of like to God, a day is 1,000 days. Or,
yeah, exactly. We have 2 grown children, 4 grandchildren, and I do all kinds of stuff. I've been a pastor my whole adult life, basically. And in 1995, I was pastoring the 13th fastest growing Protestant church in North America. And it was believe it or not, a Lutheran church, Missouri Synod church. And I was traveling all over the world, speaking and talking about church growth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And most people looked at me and thought, "Oh man, he's really, how should I put it, an expert on this subject or whatever." And I was pretty full of myself. I really was. And besides just being an arrogant guy, a young man that had become the pastor of this church that had gone from about 600 to 3,000 under my leadership in a short amount of time. But little did I know, most people would have said, "Oh, he's very creative and he's kind of temperamental to work with." But, and then we were trying to relocate the church, and we were trying to move to a former manufacturing plant. And it was, huge, and the city of Omaha didn't want to take it off its tax rolls, really.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And the reality was that we got pushback, big time, and we were in the news a lot. And what was happening to me was, behind the scenes, I was not well. I just was angry, agitated, irritated most of the time. And I especially took it out on my wife and my kids, and, tried my best to not let it show in the workplace. But I would end up having to drive around and be alone a lot. And the worse it got, the more I felt like I was dealing with this monster inside of myself. And it felt like the monster at times was controlling me instead of me controlling the monster. And that the monster just wanted me to, he just wanted to push out, push out of me. And I pleaded with the Lord many times over and said, help me. I don't know what's wrong. I was doing and the worse it got, the crazier things got for me with what I was doing behind the scenes. And it was like, to manage this monster, I had to let him have some control of my behavior, but not let him have complete control, if you will. And so I was driving late at night on dirt roads, hilly, very hilly dirt roads. Believe it or not, Nebraska does have some hills. And I know most people think it's Interstate 80, and I understand, but we do have hills and gravel roads. I would turn out my car lights at, 10 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, 11, 12, 1 in the morning. And I would drive as fast as I could without my car lights on. And I would open the car door, stick my foot out the door. There were just, if there was a murder in the city and it was on the talk radio, I went to where it was. I mean, just you name it. I was doing all kinds of risky stuff. But I had certain boundaries, like, for instance, places that I shouldn't be as a pastor, right? The adult bookstore. Well, I didn't go in, but I drove around it. It was just like crazy, ridiculous stuff. But I always felt like, I could jump off a bridge and there wouldn't be a problem. I'd survive. I just felt like I had this euphoric kind of belief about a lot of stuff. And I just felt higher than a kite. And I wasn't drinking and I wasn't taking any drugs, but I felt high. Right. And sometimes too high. And so a lot of times I would shame myself after I did all these behaviors and kind of say this, so to speak, you should not be doing this sort of thing. You need to be home in bed. You have responsibilities, et cetera. And then I would be able to calm myself down, go home, sleep a couple of hours, be back up in a couple of hours and face another day of ministry. And I usually was at the office by 4:30 or 5 in the morning. Now, little did I know that the monster that I had a name. And little did I know it was the same monster my father had lived with in his life. And my only other sibling has lived with all of her life. And, I just pleaded with God. Well, I went to Africa, and this was about the third time I went, or the second time. And got down to Nigeria, and I was still just out of sorts, just going 1,000 miles an hour, not sleeping even when I was there. And my wife and I, we say we had $120 argument on the phone, and we had an argument, and it cost me $120 in a phone bill.
Just in the phone bill. That's old school phone bill right there.
Well, yeah, this was back in '95 when I had to pay for it in Africa, so, right. But it was $150 or $120 American dollars. So multiply that times 18 and whatever that was in Naira. And that's how much it was. I mean, and my host down there was like, "Oh, you are missing your wife." And I was like, "No, we argued." But
I'm missing her, but my aim's getting better.
Yeah. When it was all, when I got home, I didn't even have patience one day my shirt was needing to be unbuttoned before I could take it off, and I couldn't get it unbuttoned. I just pulled it off. All the buttons went flying across the room. I didn't care. And little did I know that the Lord was going to answer my pleas and my prayers. And I stopped at a place on my way out to drive to these country roads, or to take a drive on these country roads. It was just a small little outhouse by a lake that was on the way out there. Wasn't too far from where I was going, and I had to pee, and I stopped, and that's what I remember. That was my purpose. I knew it wasn't safe out there because it was completely dark. It was 9:20 at night. There were people there. And when I got to the outhouse door, there was somebody standing in the doorway. So I stepped to the side of the building, over to the side, and I don't recall turning any other direction but facing the outhouse. And the next thing I knew, after I'd gone, to the bathroom against the side of the building, I went to get in my car, and all of a sudden there was this guy behind me, and he said, I'm an Omaha undercover police officer. You're under arrest.
Wow.
And I was shocked. I mean, and he said I was doing something for 20 seconds other than peeing. And long story short, one could get real hung up on that. Today, I look at it and I say it's kind of like this. He fined me a $50, a misdemeanor ticket. He didn't cuff me or anything like that, but he said it was lewd conduct, and for the life of me, still to this day, I honestly do not believe that's not something that would be in my wheelhouse of go-to for sinning.
Right. Exactly.
I've got plenty of sins that I would go to, but that's not one of them.
Right. Well, maybe it was the old adage: if you shake it more than twice, you're playing with it. Like,
yes, yeah.
You heard a couple too many.
Exactly. And like my therapist said, did he see what he believed, or did he believe what he saw? And when you're there looking for that sort of thing, but it doesn't matter anymore today. It does not matter. I paid the price more than that. Normally, for an average Joe, it would be a $50 fine. It wouldn't have been in the newspaper. It would have been hush hush. That night I went home, and I went from very manic to a very high mania to suicidal within hours. And we called one of the elders and one of the pastors on the staff, and I told them what had happened, and the elder said, let's just have you meet with an attorney, take care of this, and then you can get some help, see what was going on, and blah, blah, blah. Lo and behold, somebody in the police department told the newspaper people. And about 2-3 weeks later, it was all over the news. And it was a big story in the denomination, a big story, here locally. And, for me, it's hard because I was having a very manic episode of life at that point. And so I wasn't sure what was wrong. I knew there was something wrong with me. I felt guilty. I felt horrible. I was put on a leave of absence right away. And what happened was, today, when I play it back, it's like watching a videotape in one of those old, when they first had videotapes, probably when I was in junior high, and they didn't have lights, and you were playing it back, and it was just nighttime, and you could only see very little movement. Well, anyway, that really was God's intervention in my life. whatever happened, however it happened, and however it all came together, that's where he intervened in a major way for me. And I would never want to go through any of it again.
Right.
But, and that's almost 30 years ago now. But it was an incredibly painful thing to go through. It took,
especially as a pastor, I mean, you don't,
and it was so shameful as
yeah,
a
you
pastor.
you don't get any grace. You're expected to give grace, but boy, you don't get any grace. And again, as a pastor and as an elder, I understand the consequences for that. There is the one thing that I always try to set above everything else, as far as when Paul's talking to Titus and Timothy, is the eldership, is that be above reproach. And even in that, being above reproach as an elder is pulling off the side of the road to go take a leak next to an outhouse instead of in the outhouse, kind of deal. So
Yep.
in as guys, we wouldn't think twice about it, because we kind of grow up
well, I grew up at a farm,
right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Back porch.
And the truth is that Paul gives that to Timothy as far as when you're making someone a pastor or an elder,
right?
But there's also that passage about restoring someone, and I had a fine when I became a pastor. I didn't have any of these, it was not like I was just about to become a pastor and this happened.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Exactly.
Right. Okay. So I had proven myself to be a good pastor. And in fact, then for the next 9 months, this was constantly in the newspaper that the denomination was doing I forget what they called it, but it meant that there was a process they were going through. So anybody could call them and say anything. And nobody did, except for one person, and it was some obscure something or another. It was people could have called them just to be mean.
Right.
And it didn't happen. Well, anyway, what happened was everybody was there for the church. The leaders were all worried about the church. And my wife and my family nearly bled to death for the better part of 3 months. No help. Nobody called. It was extremely painful. And what happened then was, as they went through all of that, I finally got up to a hospital in Pine Rest in Michigan, and was diagnosed as having bipolar disorder. And what happened, or what this officer said I did, was something that would be pretty typical behavior for somebody who's very manic, or could be behavior for somebody that is. But still, it doesn't matter, I say. But the bottom line is that monster had a name. Yeah. And it was bipolar disorder. So
and what year was this?
1995.
Okay.
And so what happened then was after coming home from the hospital, I was forced to resign. And the elders were telling the people one thing publicly, and myself privately. There's since been reconciliation between all of us in the church and all of that. But the thing is that nobody knew what to do with mental illness back then. Nobody knew, so right away I was disqualified from ministry because I had a mental illness. Well,
that has to be incredibly terrifying, just because they knew so little about it back then. And even now, if you got diagnosed with, bipolar or there's still I have some friends who, live very normal lives, and they tell me, oh yeah, I'm bipolar and I just take this medicine and I'm not crazy. But if I'm not on this, just Check your six.
Yeah, just because I have a diagnosis does not mean I'm mentally ill at the time. The
Mhm.
diagnosis, the mental illness shows up when you don't care for yourself and do what you need to.
Mhm.
And just in case somebody's listening to this tonight and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm concerned that I have this, or I have a diagnosis, I have depression, or I have bipolar or whatever. I tell people it is quite possible to live extremely well in spite of having, for instance, bipolar disorder. The better part of the last 20 some years, I've lived with no episodes, no problems, no hospitalizations,
Wow.
no nothing.
Awesome.
And so that is possible, but you have to know how to take care of yourself and what to do.
Right. Explain to us what bipolar is exactly.
Well, bipolar disorder means that you are between two poles, if you will,
Okay.
and you're either too high or too low.
Okay.
And I have bipolar type 1, which I have more of the hypomania and mania.
Okay.
And so when I get excited or happy and in a good mood or whatever, or I don't get enough sleep, or I, am really juiced up about stuff that's happening in life, or stressed, my brain it'll make too much of one thing and not enough of another or whatever. And it will kick me into not being able to manage that myself. I liken it to this. If you were asleep, Jody, assuming that you don't have any mental illness, and I came in the middle of the night and shot you up with some methamphetamines,
Right.
or methamphetamine, you ain't going to act
Right.
like
Exactly.
Jody the next day.
Right.
You are just not going to act like him.
Right.
You're going to say some crazy stuff.
Mhm.
You're going to be all wackadoo.
Right.
And people are going to think, what? Straighten up. Now, Christians are notorious at thinking we all have that much control over our behavior all the time. And if your brain is not functioning correctly, it's not possible to be in your right mind.
Right.
Your mind is what your brain does. And so the brain has all these physical functions. It's no more spiritual than any other part of your body.
Right.
But it is, so it's like being on meth, or being jacked up on drugs. You're just not going to be yourself. So I would have that happen to me sometimes. And sometimes you live that way for days. Sometimes it was weeks. And then I would have periods where I required a lot of sleep, didn't have enough energy. I could go lock myself up in a hotel room and I could do more work than my entire staff of 50 some people in, 3 days.
Right.
I could do what it would take them 3 months to do.
Right.
And, but then when I came home after that, I would have to sleep and I was crabby and, but I had never really had any serious depression until this all happened.
No kidding.
And then I was suicidal. And my mother-in-law had bipolar disorder also. And about a couple of years before this happened with me, she had died by suicide because she wouldn't take her medicine.
Oh, no.
So my wife and I are kind of experts at this, and my father had it. And it's genetic. It's just like diabetes would run in a family, or heart disease, or anything else. And just because a parent has it doesn't mean that you'll have it for sure. But if the perfect storm comes together, it can kind of let loose. And it didn't help that when I was in my 20s, we were trying to have children, and I had a low sperm count. And there was thinking back then that if you gave somebody such as myself cortisone and what I'm trying to think of not just cortisone, but
Testosterone?
No,
No.
not it's all that same stuff
Okay.
with cortisone.
Right.
But if the reality is that's a mood destabilizer, and
Right.
they gave me rounds and rounds and rounds of that. We now know that the people lifting weights, that are doing it to bulk up, that sometimes they die of suicide during that time.
Oh, okay.
Because it actually causes you to have
steroids. Yeah, you
steroids.
take steroids
There you
as
go.
well. Yeah, exactly.
Steroids.
Okay.
And so don't mind me, it's late at night and I'm an old man. I can't think of words during the daytime, much less this time of night.
That's all right. Well, I figured between the two of us, we'll come up with at least one word. So we're good.
So anyway, bottom line is what happened. But here's the fascinating part of the story. Here's God's hand in all of this. First of all, after I was diagnosed, my wife looked at me and she said, I know this isn't you. And I know from my experience with my mom that you've got to do what you got to do to get better, that this is a physiological issue, but you got to do what you got to do. And she looked at me and she said, I'm not going anywhere as long as you do everything that you need to do in order to stay as well as you possibly can. I don't care if you get sick again, but if you're not doing what you need to do and you're sick, then I'm going to be mad at you. And and if you don't do what you need to do, I'm not going to stick around because I can't do this. So anyway, for 7 years, I moaned and begroaned and tried to step back onto the plate and work, right? What happened was after I resigned from that church, a group of people from that church and some key leaders, and most of them were medical, said to us, to our family, we're going to start a church. You don't have to do anything with it, but we'd like to call you and ask you to be our pastor. We believe that you need a safe place of grace and mercy where you can get better and be restored to dignity and, health and all that.
Right.
And at the end of that, we'd like you to be our pastor. But if you believe that you're not supposed to be at the end of it, then we will have done what we were supposed to do.
Wow.
And with that, they gave me a 20% pay raise, and I did nothing other than focus on getting better for the better part of 2 years.
That's what the church is supposed to do, dude.
Yeah,
awesome.
seriously.
Yeah.
That's
and
that's
if
huge.
it had not been for them and my wife, I know that today I would not be alive.
Wow.
I would have done myself in the first opportunity that I had.
Was this did you say the denomination, or did you say it was a local church that did that?
No, it was a group of people from the church that I was forced.
Oh, from your church. Okay, my bad. I'm sorry.
And the denomination did not remove me. I want to be clear about that. They did not remove me from their roster, but if I wouldn't resign from that church, they would have removed.
And they would have done right, exactly.
So,
okay.
But I chose to leave the denomination, and this group of people did not want to be part of the denomination.
Okay.
I'm telling you what. I was treated so well by those people and loved so well.
Wow.
And 2 years later, then I started pastoring slowly. And it was tough because some of the medicines I took, I joke now that it was like a game show because they had me on a medicine to stabilize my mood, and it made me forget words. So when I was preaching, you know how you used to have the outline of the 90s,
right.
People would guess what the word was, or they'd wait for you to say it or whatever. Well, we didn't have to have the outline. It would just be Brad couldn't recall a word. And then I'd go, what's that word? What's that word? And people would start shouting it out, and I'd have to go, no, that's not. Oh, that's it. 10 points.
That's funny.
And when they would come up for communion, I'd have to give them the little communion cups with the wine in because I'm
Right.
Lutheran. We have wine,
Right.
and
I'm switching to
but,
Lutheran.
but my thumb had a tremor that sometimes it would just start going woo like that, and the wine would go flying out. So I since then have always given the bread and at it which we can pick up off the floor.
Right.
But and they loved me well. And then my nephew was injured in a bus crash 7 years into it. And we were moving the church because it had grown.
Wow.
And I didn't realize all that trauma was still there for me. And between my nephew almost dying in this bus crash and people that he loved did die in it, and my sister's only 2 sons were on the same bus, and I only have a sister.
Right.
And 2 nephews. And little did I know that I could push past my medicine. Well, when I pushed past my medicine, I got it goofed up one night and I accidentally took it twice. And so I thought I could just not take it the next night. And lo and behold, the next night when I needed to take it, I didn't. And I was back up into mania then.
Right.
And, I relapsed. I ended up in the news again. This time it was for disturbing the peace. And, but of course the news people had to rehash everything.
Right.
And, at that point, then we lost our house and we had to go through a lot of more breaking,
Oh, man.
But the church stayed intact. And thank goodness for an older pastor that was retired at the time. He just walked them through that. And sooner or later, I picked back up and got better, And when I take my medicine, I'm well equipped for ministry. If I don't take my medicine, I could have a jail and prison ministry.
From the inside out. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and the interesting thing is today I do teach in the local county jail every week. And I go in and I talk about mental health and emotional health. And I've written a curriculum for them that they're starting to use in other program
That's
models.
awesome.
And but I always joke that I'm fine at going as long as they let me out. And I had one of the chaplains there. She asked me one time, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I haven't been in the news lately. I'm doing well."
Wow. It's awesome.
So anyway, after that relapse, then that's when I decided to attend some support group meetings because I didn't know how to, I needed to figure out how to live.
Right.
And I didn't know enough about my own disease. And so I started going to some support groups and they just made me sicker. You were talking about hope and the pandemic and all of that.
Right.
I was in some meetings in Washington, D.C. back when the Republicans were in office not long ago. And they brought together 9 of us that work in this area of faith and mental health. And the head people of HHS and SAMHSA were saying, we know there's a hopelessness crisis out there, and we can't do this without the church. Even if everybody that needs to go see a therapist or a doctor went, there's not enough doctors and therapists. And we know the faith community is needed. And so they were asking us about what we do, how we can help, now that was prior to the pandemic.
Okay.
And they knew that there was a horrible crisis then of hopelessness in our country. Can you imagine what it is today?
Oh, yeah. No. Well, that's my fear is, I think the result of the shutdown for that year and the aftermath of the arguing and the division and the politics and the fear and all of that kind of stuff is going to ripple out to, I would say, probably 5-10 years.
Yeah, it's a tsunami.
Yeah.
And it hasn't hit yet.
Okay. All right. Well, so we've got the ripple effect going on. We're waiting for the tsunami to hit. And that's what I see. Yeah, that's what I see even with our young people, even at our church, and parents are just, they don't even know what direction to go to, because
Well,
we
and
this massive
teenagers really suffered because you and I have never been through a pandemic either, but we had enough knocks in life to be somewhat resilient, even though we may not be completely like we were. We have some resiliency.
Right.
When teenagers are at the prime of getting to start living and they're starting to get away from mom and dad, and now I'm stuck at home, and they don't have enough resiliency. And I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but I can tell you that there has been a spike in teenage girls, especially, attempting suicide. A spike.
Yeah.
I mean, we think it's terrible if it's 3 or 4% a year that the suicide rates go up. This is the attempts are just off the chart.
I think I don't have the statistics in front of me. I can probably look them up for you while you guys are chatting about it. But Gladwell talks about this in Tipping Point, about suicide and how it can start to trend, which is terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
If you start seeing it on the news and start,
it's catching.
It catches on, and then other teens want to replicate. It's very, very terrifying.
This is on the CDC right now. It's 24% for females for teenagers.
It's just, and then I can tell you this, that alcoholism, drug abuse,
everything's up. Yeah.
I was on a call with and I can attend all the White House meetings that they have on the still yet today. But back when the pandemic had just started,
right?
President Trump was on a call with some of us, and he told us that the calls to the internet or to the national mental health suicide
line,
had gone up by 800%.
Wow.
I mean, and we know, for instance, clergy are not doing well. There's some reports that at least 48% of them would quit today if they could, because there's such a fatigue. People are
part
worn
of it
out.
is, and this is just me speculating, and it's just speaking from personal experience. Part of it is especially if you're in ministry, you feel like you're so capable. You're not going to start asking for help until it's, you're deep in it. I help people through stuff like this all the time. I'm fine. I'm a little stressed out. Maybe, I'll just pray a little bit more, sleep a little bit more, get a little exercise. I'm going to work myself through it. And that's why I think, like you had mentioned, we haven't really seen the wave that we are going to see, because it's people in all walks of life, not just ministry, who have been self-regulating and saying, I can handle this. It's just a little stress, it's a little stress from the pandemic. Money's a little tight with inflation, and people are getting laid off, but I'm not going to lose my job, and all the above. I probably agree with you. It's going to come in hot here in the next couple of years.
Yeah,
and the problem with pastoring is that there's really no place for pastors to go. Like what like you're talking about, you have this above reproach mentality, and for you to go to someone and say, man, I'm struggling, or I'm mentally, something's wrong, or I don't feel right. I had this kind of the same thing after my wife went through cancer in 2015. And I've told the story before, but I'll let you haven't heard it. I had been a caregiver for a whole year. I had 4 young kids, and I'm a full-time pastor. I owned a company at the time, so I was running a company, pastoring, as much as I could full-time, preparing sermons, making sure the kids got to school. So I did that for a whole year, making sure my wife was okay. She had surgery. She looked like a Holocaust victim, by the time she got done with all the chemo and all that kind of stuff. Well, at the end of 2015, she was healed. By first quarter 2016, she started, getting her strength back, and she started running the household again. And it was like all of a sudden, I didn't have a place in the home, where the whole year I'd been, just balls to the wall, just doing everything I could. And I'll never forget the day I woke up and I sat on the side of my bed. And if I look off the side of my bed, there's a hallway that goes into the bathroom, and we have a walkout basement. So it's a 2-story house with a basement. So it's a 3-story drop from my bathroom. And there's this plate glass window right there. And something in my head said, run and jump. And I was like, well, whatever. So I got a shower, got ready, went downstairs, started doing my devotion, got my coffee. I'm reading my Bible, and I'm on the 2nd floor now. And in my kitchen window, I see the deck. Well, I've got this pergola over the top of that, and something in my head said, go hang yourself. And I was like, whatever, just get moving. And so I get my car later on that afternoon or whatever, and something in my head said swerve, in front of a semi, or hit the bridge, or, just something like that. And it literally, there was like Groundhog's Day for the next 6-8 weeks. I would wake up, run and jump. I'd go downstairs, do my devotion, go hang yourself, in the car, swerve and, kill yourself. Well, finally, I had this massive job that I was getting. It was actually through the U.S. Marines, and it was going to be in North Carolina. And I was supposed to go check this job out, and they were going to give me the purchase order, and it was going to take care of me for a long time, and blah, blah, blah. And I got off the phone with the general on the base, and he said, I got on the phone. He said, I need you to here. I'll give you the purchase order once I put eyeballs on you. I don't like doing this stuff over the internet and over the phone and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, great. I hung up the phone, and as soon as I hung up the phone, I thought, I know exactly where I'm going to do it. Like, I'll be in a hotel in North Carolina. Who cares if a maid finds me? I didn't want my kids to find me. Didn't want my wife to find me. And that broke me at that point in time. And I canceled the trip. I lost the job. I went and got help. And I told my wife. Then I had to tell my church, and it was kind of one of those things that my elders never saw it. They didn't see the stress because I could hide it really easy, and all of those kind of things. And I think that's probably, especially for men in general, is that we have this thing called pride that we don't want anybody to know. And there's just not a lot of places to go. And so,
and the lie that we tell ourselves,
right,
is that I can handle this,
right,
that I can fight it. I can say whatever. I can ignore it. I can.
Yeah, and I was thinking, man, I've got a ministry called Man Up. Like, you just buck up, dude. Suck it up, like you said earlier. Yeah,
yeah. And the truth is that stress has a lot to do with our mental health.
Oh, yeah.
How we handle stress, what we do with it, and most people are burning the candle at too many ends.
Amen.
And
yes.
the middle, and they aren't caring for themselves and resting. I'm sorry to tell you, but I'm going to hit you heavy here, Jody.
Okay.
You were talking at the beginning of the podcast tonight that you been working this building the house and all that.
Right.
When you take a sabbatical, and Mondays were your Mondays. If
Right.
you're doing a podcast for how many hours on Monday night?
Oh, you just busted me.
Monday doesn't count.
So I almost busted him. I almost
just
busted him. And the
busted
only reason I didn't, because traditional Sabbath is from sun up to sundown. And technically, once the sun goes down, we can start working again.
Yeah.
I know.
So that's the only reason I didn't bust you. I thought it though. As long as you're shutting down Sunday night, when
that's
Sunday night
good.
happens, that's your Sabbath. Then Monday night is back on, baby.
Well,
part of
the Man Up. I was going to say part of the Man Up teaching is, learning to have those spiritual disciplines of learning to read your Bible, pray, repentant lifestyle, fasting, and honoring the Sabbath. Honoring a Sabbath, not the Sabbath.
Well, and I went to a pastor's retreat. This was back when Bill Hybels wasn't Bill Hybels yet. And I told Rick Warren when I saw him a couple of years ago, I knew you before you were Rick Warren. And I peed next to you at a urinal in Palm Springs, California at a retreat. And but anyway, the thing is that one of the doctors there, I forget his name, but he talked about that pastors should never, ever take Mondays off. Never. They should always work and make the church pay for that day, because you have post-adrenaline blues.
Well,
And
yeah.
that's the day of the week that most pastors quit. So he
That's a
said,
good-
just go in and be mindless, sit there aimlessly,
Sit there.
just clean it
Yeah.
off, answer a few this, put papers in order, but make them pay for it.
So
Take the day of the week off that you are the most rested.
the
And he
only
said-
problem with that is the assumption is they're not mindless 100% of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, most people don't understand what pastors go through on a Monday.
Mm.
Like there's this, so
terrible.
you start literally Monday thinking about Sunday's sermon, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, you're researching. Thursday, Friday, you're writing. Saturday, you're formulating. And Sunday, it's like the Super Bowl, and all of a sudden
Yeah.
you've got this up. You're high, you're ready to go, and then by 3 or 4 o'clock Sunday, it's like, oh my gosh, I lost it all. Like it's this depression that kicks in.
Yeah, and you have a bit of preacher's remorse is what I call it. On
Right.
Sunday afternoon, you say, oh boy, I said that.
Right.
I can't believe I said that in the sermon. Oh boy, I should have. So-and-so, that's going to offend so-and-so, and that's going to hurt the giving, or that's going to,
Yeah.
Right.
Now,
Well,
one of the things I will say is that through the pandemic and everything, there's been a couple of things we've done to help people process the trauma of the pandemic, because
Okay.
understanding the trauma of it is a major big thing. And so we have like a free Bible study, a 4-week Bible study that groups can download. It doesn't cost anything. We're happy to give it away, but it's on processing the pandemic together.
Mm.
And
good.
trauma can hold people and be problematic if they don't talk. And men are horrible. We are horrible at
Right.
processing our emotions and feelings. We just hold it in. We don't talk. We go out shoulder to shoulder, talk about the game, talk about the weather. When women go out for lunch, they face each other and talk, and I'm so upset, or I'm this, or I'm that, and they're processing emotions, but men we just don't do it. And so that we have that study, but we also have a thing for pastors and their spouses that we just have started, and it's called Healing the Heart Wounds of Ministry.
Mm.
And it just teaches, and not teaches, we don't teach pastors anything new.
Right.
We give them the opportunity and the space to actually experience how to process emotional pain.
Right.
And emotional wounds that happen in ministry happen because we're working too hard. We don't have our priorities set straight or whatever. And for the spouse.
That's good. That's
So-
really good. So let's go back to your diagnosis, your relapse, you finally went to a few groups. You realized those groups weren't working. Matter of fact, they were making you worse. What did you go and what did you do from there?
Well, I'm a good German Lutheran. I complained to the doctor every time I saw him. And how nothing that what I needed didn't exist, and
Okay.
what I wanted was a hope-filled, faith-filled group of people that held each other accountable, might say poo-poo spelled differently, but could also say the Lord and pray for each other and be spirit-filled. I
Right.
wanted that.
Right.
And I knew that's what I needed. And one day he looked at me and he goes, Brad, start it. Start that group. And if you need some help or need the assurance of that you're on the right track, I'll give it to you.
Right. Mm.
Okay. Well, I think he got tired of hearing me complain. And so I did. And I started the group, and I thought for sure, I was certain that I would start the group. We'd have people there the first night, and when they realized who I was and what my story was, they would quit coming.
Wow.
And that isn't what happened.
Mm.
They said, if a church can show up you that kind of grace, and you're doing this, I need this. And what happened was, bit by bit, churches across the country were looking for something that was faith-based. There was Celebrate
Right.
Recovery for the, hurts, habits, and hangups, but mental illness is not a hurt, habit, or hangup.
Right.
And it's not a choice. It's not, I didn't choose to go whack-a-doodle. And by the way, I'm the only one who can use that word. Unless you have a diagnosis, then you can call me wackadoodle. It's just like a lot of those other words out there.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't use the C word. I stop using the C word was a thing that was just a op-ed that I wrote that was printed. And my son was like, Dad, do you realize how provocative that title is? And I go,
yeah, exactly.
But it's the crazy C word.
Yeah, I got that. I was going to say that I used to call my wife that. I don't do that anymore. So.
No. But the bottom line is that once that started, I had been trained at the seminary quite extensively in how to help people with alcoholism. And to me, there's a lot of similarities. Like once I started getting better and they put me on the medicine to stabilize my mood, I kept looking at my wife and saying, is this how normal people feel? This is blah. Right. This is boring. This isn't, there's nothing exciting about life. And she said, yeah, get used to it. Now you're going to be an adult. And I'm like, oh, shoot.
That's fine.
So we had tenets, we have recovery principles. And instead of separating the people who love people who have a mental illness and the people with the mental illness, we keep them together because they can learn a lot from each other. And there's stuff a wife can hear another husband say, and it's not her husband, and she actually hears what he's saying. And, so the cross-pollination. Well, we've since moved from having a book and that to having, I think we have over 110, 120 groups in the United States. We have groups for people from 19 different countries. We were using Zoom before the pandemic, certainly had to use it since the pandemic.
Right.
Everything that we do is in Spanish and English. And also now Japan is starting Fresh Hope. And so it's being translated in Japanese, and into Hong Kong is doing it. So it's Chinese, and then 3 languages from India. It's being translated.
Praise God. That is awesome.
It's also in French. Now, I'm going to tell you, I have never, ever been above reproach. If anybody saw 20 seconds of my life, any choice 20 seconds, I can tell you. But by God's grace, he took everything that was broken and painful in my life, and it became liquid gold. I found out that actually being honest about my worst parts of my life is where the Lord brings healing to other people. It becomes, I tell the guys in jail, I always say to them, yeah, I saw you on the news, and yeah, I saw you on the news. But let me tell you, I've been on the news more than all of you put together, and it was and then they lean in, and it's like all of a sudden I have street cred with them.
Right, exactly.
And if I can go through that, they know there's hope for them.
Right. That's great.
And there's nothing in the mental health field today. What's happening is peers are really good at helping other peers. Those with lived experience, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like somebody that's been through it to be able to look you square in the eye and say, you can do this, and I'm going to walk with you. Now, a doctor is needed, and many times medicine is needed. A therapist may be needed, and all of those things are good, but that's not enough. Because between those doctor's appointments or the appointments that you have with your counselor, there's a lot of life. How do you live it? How do you learn how to live it? And how do you do it practically? And
Right.
so we bridge that gap between those times, and we walk with people. So we help churches start Fresh Hope support groups. We have teen groups now. We have some groups that are just for women. We are starting some groups that are just for men, because my experience with the groups with men and women in them, sometimes the men don't get a chance to talk. And,
Or
they don't have as
don't
many
feel comfortable.
words.
Yeah, sometimes I mean, guys just need to talk to each other the way that guys talk to each other.
Yep.
And that doesn't always work with having women in the group. Not saying that
Exactly.
there's not a lot that can be learned from both sides,
Right.
but sometimes in order to flesh some of that stuff out, you need that.
Mhm.
So,
And we
so
have some groups that are for when a husband and wife, when one of the two of them has a mental health diagnosis that focuses on the marriage and mental health issues. And we also now have this for pastors.
Okay.
And we've grown also into having refocusing widows, which seems like not a mental health issue, but it is, because
It is, right.
and the same we'll have it for widowers. Plus,
Wow.
we do trauma healing groups. So through the American Bible Institute, the Trauma Healing Institute of the AIB, we help people through trauma healing, and we do that in prisons, and we do it in jails, and we do it in churches. And then the last thing that we have been doing now that's new since the pandemic is a thing called hope coaching. Because
Right.
believe it or not, there's actually 25 years of clinical research on how hope works and what hopelessness is and what causes hopelessness. And
That's great.
and like I told them in Washington, D.C., we take that clinical research and then we infuse it with faith. And when you infuse Christ into that kind of hope, now you've gone beyond hopeful thinking. You've
Right.
got sure and certain hope.
Right.
So God can take everything we go through and make it work together for his good.
Praise
and,
God.
And I'm living proof of that.
Amen.
And
so take me through. So each group is really based on, is it mental issues or emotional issues? Is it anxiety? Is
each group, any kind of mental health diagnosis, the main groups, the Fresh Hope for mental health groups.
Right.
Now, what I do in the jail is a little different. That's both meant, it could be because you've got a diagnosis. It could be because you have addictions. It could
Right.
be because you've been incarcerated. But I can tell you this, everybody has emotional issues.
Right. Exactly.
Everybody does.
Right.
And so a lot of what we cover in that is emotional health and emotional regulation, and what trauma does, it stunts your emotional development. But we also cover that kind of stuff in our Fresh Hope groups.
Okay.
But we also, in the Fresh Hope groups, you have an expertise there of people who have a diagnosis. They've gone through trying to find the right medicines. There's some expertise that you wouldn't have, like if we were only talking about emotional issues. But we talk about all those things. A lot of men don't realize that they might have a high IQ, but they don't have a very good EQ.
Right.
And it's not very high. And so they're not able to regulate their emotions. And especially once they get mad, it all goes out the window, Wow.
That's a issue for most men. It's like learning to, and one of the things that we try to do here at Man Up, God's Way, is to get guys in the Word of God, be full of the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Like, if you're doing some of the spiritual disciplines, not saying that the world's not going to kick you in the knees every now and then, but if you're doing those and you're learning the Word of God and you're praying and you're having a repentant life and you're fellowship and you're discipling and being discipled, holding those things accountable, men are 10 times better than they are by not doing those things. And so I can see how these groups would work. So walk me through, let's say, well, I am a pastor. So let's say I have issues at my church that maybe I haven't identified somebody to lead this group right now, but maybe there's 2 or 3 people that I know that are bipolar or that have, some kind of schizophrenia or, they're on medications, they're on something to control one or all the above. What would I do as a pastor through Fresh Hope?
Okay. 2 things that you said, may I just speak into?
Heck yes.
One, you don't know anybody that is bipolar.
Okay.
You only know people who have bipolar disorder.
All right, man. Okay.
They cannot become their diagnosis.
Got it.
That's one of the stigma busters that we got to do, is to help people. I have bipolar disorder, but there's sure a heck of a lot more to me than just that.
Okay, got it.
But secondly, none of the medicines, for the most part, that are given ever control anybody. They hopefully help the brain function better, and make the right chemicals, and then the person can control themselves better, Right. And so what would happen is you could contact us and say, we'd like to start a Fresh Hope group at our church. And great. And we'd introduce you to Samantha. She lives in El Salvador. She's a pastor, Assemblies of God pastor that was diagnosed as having bipolar disorder, and prayed to the Lord one day. She was not doing well. And she said, I just want to meet one pastor who's living well with this, Lord, just one pastor. And she was introduced to Fresh Hope a day or 2 later, went to a group. We never met or any of that for quite some time. And anyway, she runs our operations. So you're starting a new group. The training, once the right people are identified as facilitators, we prefer to train 2 or 3 people, and we train them. It's all online. We certify them, and then they are with us for as long as you have that group and they're facilitating.
Now, do your trainers need a diagnosis?
We prefer that at least one of the facilitators has a diagnosis, and we also prefer that the people who are facilitating with them have some kind of lived experience. Maybe they grew up in a home with a mom or a dad, or they have a sibling, or maybe they have an adult child or a child or whatever. And if they are a clinician, we don't mind clinicians doing it, but they have to approach it as a peer, not a clinician.
Got it.
And, the reality is the code of ethics for a therapist is that they're not supposed to discuss their personal issues with you. Well, that's part of what the problem is. When people know that this guy talking to me has been through this, all they have to know is my story, and pretty much everything I say to them is going to hold some weight.
It's like a Catholic priest trying to give marriage advice.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, but now with our Hope coaching, that's different. That's just to help people in any situation. So anybody that wanted to have, and by the way, we have churches that are training everybody that is a small group leader, all their men's leaders, all their women leaders, all their Sunday school teachers. Everybody's being taught how to do Hope coaching, because all Hope coaching is a very simple way of dialoguing with people who are in difficult circumstances and may or already may have become hopeless.
Wow. And what would that cost for somebody to go through that kind of training?
The truth is, we give most of it away.
Seriously?
Yeah. It's more important to us that people have access. Now, there are material costs. There's the cost for a book. There's technically supposed to be cost for going through the training. And maybe someday we'll actually charge for it, but
Right.
it's more important for people to have that. And quite honestly, you don't run into somebody and go, "Oh, you sound hopeless. Let me put my hope coaching cap on. And here's my card, by the way."
Right.
It's more of, if you're at the gym and you're talking to one of the guys in the locker room and he says his wife just found out she has breast cancer. You learn short, sweet questions to ask to help people process their pain. Once you've heard their pain,
Man.
maybe it's after a conversation or two with that person, then you ask one question or two that helps them see steps forward.
Right.
And once people see a step or two forward that they can go forward, they will not become hopeless. As long as hopelessness, very simply put by all the research of 25 years, is this. It's as simple as this: not seeing a way forward.
Right. Yep.
And most men who die by suicide became hopeless. It's more of a hopelessness issue than a mental illness or depression. It is, they don't see a way forward. And financial things can look like there's no way forward, only failure. And men can easily do that, and they never talk about it. And people don't become suicidal by hearing about suicide. They become suicidal by internalizing it and keeping it inside, like you were doing. You know, it only gets worse.
Right.
Somewhere
Exactly.
you got to let it out. And when you start letting it out, it doesn't hold the power. Secrets keep us sick. And so, yeah.
That's good.
So the hope coaching is different than what happens in our mental health support groups. But the one thing that I want to say is that a lot of people think mental illness is a scary thing. It's very interesting. In every place in this world where we have Fresh Hope, and that's 17 different countries, Kenya just started Fresh Hope.
Right.
And they have a group of pastors and therapists that are meeting, and they're going gung ho. I mean, South Africa's had it for a while, but all these places where there's not this dichotomy. In the United States, we have a problem. We think the church deals with spiritual matters and let the mental health clinicians deal with mental health stuff. We are not experts in it, therefore now wait a minute. AA for years has understood the best person to help an alcoholic is another alcoholic.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so what we're finding in the mental health world is that the research shows that when a peer, somebody with lived experience, helps somebody with living the experience, when that happens, they get better, and they get just as it's just as effective as if it were talk therapy. And
there's no profit for a cure. That's the problem with the mental health industry, is there's no profit for a cure. And so they're not real, pharmaceutical companies want them to stay on all the drugs they could possibly get on. The clinicians want them to keep coming into the office. So,
and there's a book I read, I don't have it by me tonight, but it's this doctor actually believes that what we think is depression and requires medicine in this country is actually not depression, it's learned helplessness. And that it is medicine doesn't help that. It's going to be relationships. Do you know that they have better outcomes for schizophrenia in Africa than we do in the United States? And part of it is because in the United States, our way of dealing with it is give them medicine, and when they become too much to handle, let them go live in a house with other people with schizophrenia. Let me ask you something. Do you have teenagers now?
I do. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you care about who they hang around with?
Heck yes.
Yeah. Because why?
Yeah, because they influence them.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
they become like the people they hang out with, right?
Right.
Mental illness is catching to a certain degree. So
Wow.
when you put a whole bunch of people in a house together that are all schizophrenic or have schizophrenia, I just did the schizophrenic.
Yeah, there you go.
I just did it. But you put them all together,
Yes.
what are they going to learn? They're going to learn how to be sick.
Man, that's
we
good.
have to, the church should be a place where people are assimilated, where it's normalized. And that's what they do in Africa.
Well, they say that you are the product of, your five closest friends. And that's something like an entrepreneurial adjective that's been around for a while. You hang around your five closest friends, and that's who you're going to end up like. And so why would that be any different from, these people who are struggling with these illnesses?
Right. It's the same. And for instance, what I find a lot of people don't like some of the things we teach within Fresh Hope for Mental Health because they've been part of the system a long time. And so see, part of what happened to me when I went to some of those groups is the conversation was, how did you get on disability? What medicines are you taking?
Right.
And I was like, no, how do you go to work every day and function? And how are you there for your kids? And how, because you don't go to figure out how to be sick, you got to figure out how to live in spite of it.
So that brought something to my mind. I mean, you look at right now, most industries can't even find employees, especially the industry that used to be teenager driven, which was the restaurant business. They can't even find help anymore. Is this something maybe that's going on in the world of teens and teens and young adults, that they are so
they're
hell bent on, they're stretched, and they're so emotionally fragile, but they're trying to live off the system, and everything's anxiety and everything's depression and everything, like is that what's keeping people from work? Because I just don't know how they're doing it. Like it's, and you made a great point saying, well, how did you get on disability, and how did you find this, and how do you, like, you're
capable.
Yeah. Well, they're doing they're going through the system.
Right. Well, and there are times where people have to be on disability, no doubt about it.
Exactly. I'm not
physical or mental health stuff, but more times than not, it's learned helplessness. And let me explain to you what that means. For instance, if I go and I only do the medical side of mental health. So if I only do the doctor, the medicine, and a therapist, those are people that know more than me. They know better how I should be, how I should think. Do you see what I'm saying? And it feeds into that victim. I'm the victim of this disease. No, I'm over my own recovery. And if I don't like the psychiatrist and I don't like the medicine, I can get a second opinion, third opinion, and I'm the one in charge of me. I know me, and I need to be doing me. But this book that I read, this doctor who it's about pessimistic mindsets, that there are people with pessimistic mindsets and it can be changed. And that you can learn to have a positive mindset, and it's quite complicated. It's a really good read, but it's complicated. But here's the deal: they did this research on dogs in the 70s, which they can't do today because they can't shot dogs, I guess. Anyway, I'm not quite of that mindset, but I respect people who are. They took 3 dogs and they put them in 3 black boxes, and there were doors that swiveled to go into another box that was lit that had food in it.
Right.
And the first dog, they never shocked it, and it would find that door and it would go get its lunch. The second dog, they'd shock it when it would touch that door. But once it pushed through that door, they wouldn't shock it again and it would eat its food.
Right.
The third one, they would shock every time it touched the door. And they kept shocking it once it would go into the second box. By the second or third day, the dog just laid down in the box.
Mm.
And that's learned helplessness.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of telling people, oh, just lay down, we'll take care of it for you,
Right.
we need to say, no, now just a second. We're going to teach you how to be resilient. We're going to teach you how to have a different mindset. And the very interesting thing about science and what we, they're finding out a lot more about the brain and brain scans and all kinds of things. We're kind of in the dark ages with the brain because there's been so many other diseases that have taken so much time to overcome. And now we're kind of at the brain in the medical field. And the interesting thing is, for instance, science is now proving the Bible to be correct.
Right.
They can do research on the brain, and you can chemically change your brain by detoxing your thoughts and your thinking.
Mm.
Stinking thinking and ruminating cause more problems for people mental health wise than a lot of other things.
Exactly
ever.
right.
We
Yeah.
we came up from a different generation too. Like I've had some rough goes in my life. I've been homeless for a period of time. I've been down and out with no money. And luckily I was involved in a sport. I was involved in wrestling for a really long time. And I had some great coaches, mentors who built mental toughness in me. There's not a lot of that in the, I'm turning into one of those old guys. Oh, that kids these days, aren't resilient, but we're not allowed to. My brother is a wrestling coach and a PE teacher, and he'll call and he'll admit to me on what he's allowed to do and what he's not allowed to do, and what's okay, what's not okay. And
Yep.
it almost makes the job of our teachers and our counselors in schools and our coaches,
Mhm.
it's very difficult to raise the same type of mental tough kids.
Yep.
Well, there's,
I-
have you ever
yep.
heard that? Have you ever heard that saying that says hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
kind of the cycle that we're going in. If you look at the baby boomers who came out of World War II, balls to the wall, ready to conquer the world. Those hard times created strong men. There was some really, and the women back then were just as strong. And and then strong men create good times. And from the 40s, late 50s to the up until now, really, we haven't had major issues. We've had a couple of financial issues, but nothing other than the Vietnam War and the Afghan War and little things like that, but nothing here in the United States. And then all of a sudden these good times create weak men.
Yeah.
And weak children. And now we've got, weak men are going to create hard times. I mean, we've got to get, I'm 53, and, that generation between 35 and 80 have got to do something a little bit different than what we've been doing. We got to buck up and get ready for it.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like I'm in that category, or I'm in that group of, as hard-nosed as I am, I don't always feel like the strong man who's got it all figured out. There are moments of mental weakness. There are moments of, I want to give up. It was interesting. I was hearing you talk about, I've been pretty open on this show of struggling with suicide before, and, some of my music leads into that. But you had mentioned that it's not depression. It's how did you phrase that? Because it struck me. We were talking about
Hopelessness.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
It's
so
when you didn't see a way forward.
Yeah.
So you can only see a way out.
And
It's
maybe
why our young people are shooting each other and killing each other in our urban areas. They're hopeless.
And I think
Right.
I think this is correlated. I think that, and again, I think I'm on the other side of this. When things get so overwhelmingly tough, I fall out of my depression. I actually get fired up. Like
Right.
when things get really, really bad, I have a direction. Like I know how, okay, I have a huge problem to fix. I got this. I know what to do. It's when things get easy, when money's in the bank, when things are going well, that's when I actually struggle with my depression. It's the opposite. And I think it might be a generational thing to where
I think it's spiritual, because it's more than a generational thing. It's spiritual, because I see it in church. When people have money and they're on vacations and they're going away, the next thing you know, they're falling away from church. They're not reading their Bibles. They're not, spending good quality time with God. And it's this cyclical effect that happens. It's almost like the Deuteronomic cycle that happened, the Israelites, oh, we're worshiping God, we love God, and here their nation is great. And the next thing you know, they start worshiping idols and God makes them a slave, and they just keep doing this over and over. And that's what we do, I believe, in our spirit.
Well, we do that. There's a lie in, and I could get in trouble here with some pastors, I suppose, but here's the lie that even modern day evangelicalism is teaching people.
Right.
That once you say that sinner's prayer, you don't need to worry about your sins anymore. Yeah, well, I don't know about you guys, but when I read the Bible, I see that Paul, the older he got, the more he was claiming to be the chief of all sinners. Mm-hmm. Faith is not we sin until we die. And so we've got to come to the Lord and confess to him on a daily basis and receive forgiveness and live out of forgiveness. I don't remember what we were talking. Okay. So
I always say that you'll never be sinless, but you will sin less, as a Christian.
Well, why did Paul think that he was the chief of all sinners towards the end of his life?
Right. I don't know if he was reminiscing or, I look back on my life, when I first gave my life to the Lord in 2003, what I was doing then was nothing like what I do now.
Oh, right.
You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not saying that Paul was,
doing those same things. Yeah, exactly.
I was not saying he was sinning even more.
Right.
What he realized was that one sin was
right, exactly. It was too much.
One
yeah, exactly.
Sin was already, and I think what we do to ourselves in this society is somehow we've got this idea that there's this ideal I have to live up to. Right. And the reality is everybody is broken. Everybody has fallen short. I am not better than a lot of other people. I'm better off if they don't know Jesus. That's it.
Right.
And but this whole mindset of what were we talking about with the mindsets?
We were just talking about the weak-minded kids, and then them not having jobs and not getting into just into society in general, because of this, just because of the emotional
we get into
immaturity. Right. The immaturity
really easily.
Right.
I was part of and by the way, when Paul says take captive your thinking,
right,
scientifically we say detox your thinking, be in control of what you think, and it'll change your mind, your brain chemistry. Well, it changes your heart chemistry too. It changes your whole but have you ever seen that? Who's the guy that used to play the psychiatrist on TV?
Kelsey Grammer.
No,
Fraser. Before that.
Yes, I'm just that much older than you. That
Bob Newhart.
Yeah, Bob Newhart.
Yeah.
There's a skit. If you type in his name into YouTube and put Bob Newhart skit, stop it.
Right.
And the psychiatrist, he charges by the minute or something.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
This lady says, I want to do this and this and this. And he says, well, stop it.
Stop it or I'll bury you in a box.
Yeah.
That was her
Yeah, I
fear,
was going
right?
to bury her in a
Yeah.
box.
She said,
So-
I'm scared of being buried in a box. He says, well, does it
Exactly.
drive you
Some
crazy?
of what we taught our kids was failure's good.
Right.
In fact, really, none of us ever grows without pain. And I
No,
think
not at
that's
all.
what your producer's saying. I can't think of
Fregosa. Yeah.
yeah. You could tell it's even getting later now. More words that are not
Right.
coming to mind. But
That's all right.
the fact is that we are we just don't we think that we're not going to be broken and we're not going to we shouldn't have as much pain or whatever. But every time you have pain, every time, see, you get up and go when times
Right.
get tough. That tells me you have resiliency.
Right.
It's when the going gets tough and people can't go, that's something's wrong. I was part of the dark horse research that they did out of Harvard. You can check it out. Just Google the website. One time I thought, did that doctor really call me? Was I really part of that research? I had to look it up once myself. I didn't make the book because I think they were a little apprehensive about some of my answers in regards to faith and how that allowed me to, to make it through resilient. But the bottom line is that when I went through everything, I found out what I was really made of.
Right.
If you would have told me I was going to go through it, I would have said, I'm going to fall apart.
Mhm.
But some of our talk to ourselves about ourselves before we ever hit hard times has a lot to do with how we handle the hard times.
Right.
For instance, if you say things like, I could never handle that if that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say that out loud. Now
Yeah,
you're giving the enemy ideas.
Yeah.
And secondly,
surprised.
you're already telling yourself you can't handle it.
Yeah. I keep
And it
telling
hasn't
God not to
even
make me a missionary in Hawaii.
Yeah.
But, so sometimes you just got to say, stop it,
Right. Yeah. Amen. That's
be
great.
strong,
Great.
and it's not the pull up your bootstraps kind of strong, be a man enough to say, I'm having suicidal thinking.
Yeah,
Right.
I think part of the issue that people have with the pull it up by your bootstraps is because they're taking that as, oh, see, it's not that bad. I think the realistic of, hey, this is the situation I'm in. Like you said, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. I can either choose to succumb,
Mm-hmm.
or I can step up to the plate and overcome it. And it's a mindset. No one got anywhere by having a victim mentality.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm guilty of it.
Yep.
I've had that before, but you have to overcome that, and you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, nope, I'm going to do this.
But there's times where we absolutely have to process our pain.
Of course.
We need to, Christians are notorious at trying to sugarcoat pain.
Right.
Jesus will get you through this. I'm praying for you. God's got your back, blah, blah, blah. Read the Psalms, folks. Read the Psalms. Those people were saying, God, why are you so good to my enemies? And they were Jewish. They were not, there's a Hebrew word for anger, and it means your large intestine hurts.
Right.
That's what it literally means. Okay.
Oh yeah, it's a spleen thing. What is that?
Yeah. So the bottom line is that the whole business of complaining to God and hurting and feeling your pain is important for processing it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't minimize what you're going through. But it's then at that point, do I sit down and now say, this is so horrible, I can't move forward? Or do I do what is a godly lament? And that is, so God, only you can solve this. I cannot solve it. I will not even try to solve it. But while you're solving it, God, I will trust you. I will praise you. I will focus on you. And now you've looped yourself out of the stinking thinking onto what you're going to do while the Lord takes care of the problem.
Right. That's good. That's good. Well, brother, why don't you tell us a little bit, how does somebody get a hold of you guys?
Just go on freshhope.us. If you want to email us, you can email me at pastorbrad@freshhope.us, or my assistant is Maria at freshhope.us. We have a YouTube channel. We're on Facebook, all the typical places. We have a lot of free resources. We have a podcast also called Fresh Hope for Mental Health, and I interview people that have gone through mental health issues, as well as leaders and doctors and other folks in the mental health field. And I'd love to hear from many of your listeners. I'm curious, no questions on your chat tonight or anything?
Well, we had they were running through a little bit, but I think a lot of thumbs ups and good jobs and great conversation, but no questions. So we didn't make a
lot of amens.
Yeah, we didn't make the point of saying ask a question. I completely forgot. So
we had one.
I thought maybe they'd want to know what I thought of Nebraska football. That's almost a hopeless situation anymore these days.
Yeah, you're sounding like a lot of the teams out there nowadays. They're not hurting. A lot of them are hurting. The big guys are just running all over everybody. So, but I two things real quick before we let you go. Your groups, people, I want you to understand that you could go to a group, get training to do that. You could also become a coach and learn how to better be equipped for some of the issues that might arise, especially if you're in a church. I mean, I would highly suggest that you do this. Matter of fact, I was signing up as we were talking, you and Fregosa were talking for a minute, and I was signing up to become, get some info on the coach, because I think that would be good just as a pastor, just to have, I'm a rub some dirt on it kind of guy, like just, I'll fix it for you, don't worry about it. And that's not a good way either. So
no, it's not. Yeah,
no, it doesn't help, somebody who's grieving or in some, very emotional situations. And so I'm learning that as I've been pastoring now for 17 years and 18 years. And it's, wisdom is catching up with me, which is good. So is age, and it helps me a lot, compared to my earlier days. So go to the website if you want a group or to understand.
Now, if they want to attend a group online, you can find groups in local cities.
Got it.
Not every state has groups.
Okay.
Many do. But if you don't want to start one, or you just need to attend a group, you can go to a group online. And if you love somebody who has a mental health issue, you can attend that group also.
Right.
And they don't have to go together. You can go to different groups, or you can come alone, either with a diagnosis or you're the person who loves somebody.
So last question is, what does someone do? What would your suggestions be to someone who is dealing with mental illness? Maybe they haven't been diagnosed. Maybe they're trying to drown it out with drugs or alcohol or complacency or loneliness or hopelessness, like you said. What's your suggestion for someone in that position?
Talk to somebody that can help you figure out what it is.
Okay.
Talk to a professional, or go to a support group and start trying to figure it out. Mental illness, if you have a mental illness, for instance, it's a lot like, I'm going to really show my age. I'm going to be 65 in February, and I've had hearing aids for quite a few years, and all the men in my dad's side of the family have hearing problems. And so somebody gave me $6,000 to buy hearing aids years ago. It was a gift. I bought them. I hardly wear them. And hearing is a strange thing because you think it's a volume issue. It's not. It really is. I can usually hear. I can't understand what they're saying because I'm losing high pitches for the consonants and the T's and the C's and the Z's.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so what I've learned though is if I wear the hearing aids, my hearing gets better for a couple of days then, and then I don't wear them, and then I'm okay, and then I have to put them in, and okay. Bottom line is mental illness is a lot like that, as well as your eyes. If you don't wear your glasses, your eyes are going to get worse.
Right.
But the glasses can slow the impairment of the vision down, if not sometimes even reverse it.
Right.
So if you think there's something wrong with you, go sooner than later to a doctor. Medical doctors, the internists are not always the best people, but they can be the best place to start.
Yeah.
But I want to tell you something. If you have something, let me ask you this. If you had cancer of the lung and you never smoked a day in your life, and would you feel like you were a weak man because of that?
No. No.
Of course not.
No.
Same is true if it's with your brain.
That's good.
The same is true. Do you know that your brain is going to get buried with your body? Because it isn't going to go to heaven separate of the rest of your body.
Right.
It's just as I always say, your brain is no more spiritual than your large intestine. We could go farther down that line.
Right, exactly.
Okay. And
That's funny.
and by the way, I wrote down on my list here that there's one more thing I want to mention before we go, but go and talk to somebody, because if you have an issue, be a man and face it.
Amen.
Face it. Don't pretend like it's not there. That's not being a man. That's being a wimp. And we men are kind of wimpy when it comes to discovering whether we have cancer or diabetes or whatever. We don't want to know,
now
like it'll go away.
You're meddling. Now you're meddling.
Yeah, I know. Trust me, I'm meddling.
To the choir.
Yeah, well, I know gluttony is a sin that God hates, and I have never preached a sermon on that because I'd be meddling in my own business.
I get it.
But isn't it interesting how I can pick the other sins up that other people have?
Well, that's always easy. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But
so what's your last thing there on the list?
Okay, men have a ball problem.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Now, the ball problem is this. We think we have issues. Everybody's got issues. I don't care who you are. And I have the spiritual gift of triggering people. So if you think you have no issues or you don't have significant issues, come and let me live with you.
Right.
For 24 to 36 hours, and I'll trigger you most likely, and we'll know what your issues really are.
Right.
I'll do some digging fast.
Exactly.
Okay. So what we think we need to do is, I'm not a victim of this issue. I'm not this, and I will take this and push this, and I will take care of it by my sheer grit and will. Right.
Right.
So it's like having an issue like alcoholism, for instance, or emotional regulation or trauma or whatever. We think the issues is like a big, huge beach ball that's greased up with Crisco. And now we're out in the middle of the ocean and we're going to try to manhandle that thing and keep it under the water, right? Because we don't want that thing popping out and other people knowing our stuff. And some of us have multiple ones to keep under the water. And what happens is the minute the stress hits in life and the ocean swells up and the waves start hitting, the balls are going to pop out. They just are. And but there is a way to receive healing and process those issues that it actually lets the air out of those balls. And it's not by sheer manly grit.
Right.
It is by being a man and big enough and secure enough to say, I need help with this.
That's good.
I need to not be in a vacuum. I need the assistance of other men. I need God. I need to own up to this, because pain, God does not want to waste your pain.
Amen.
And he's good. He redeems all things, including the beach balls.
Mm-hmm.
Praise God, brother. That's
Awesome.
a good word. That is a good word. Well, Pastor Brad, we're praying for your ministry. Lord, what an amazing just vision that God has given you, and a passion behind that. Unfortunately, he took you to the belly of the whale in order to get there. But I think what you're showing people is that that's the protocol that people need to understand, that you know what they're going through, and to be there as a peer and not somebody that's lording over them to an extent. Even if you're not, a lot of times people just think that, you think you're better than they are. And when you're sitting down eyeball to eyeball, man, it's so much better when you can do those things. And so make sure, folks, that you go to freshhope.us in order to check out a group, to start a group, maybe even to become a coach. Make sure that you support this ministry. And more importantly, if you do feel like you have mental illness, suicidal thoughts, please don't wait to talk to someone. Even if it's just someone really quick tonight, call them, check in with them, and just make sure that that you at least let them know that there's some issues, some problems. And then tomorrow, make sure you get on the phones and call a physician, and we will be praying for you. So, Pastor Brad, thank you so much, brother.
There are no hopeless situations.
Amen. Amen. I love that.
Good
I
stuff.
love that. Well, we will see you soon, and we'll talk some ministry here later on. And again, we'll be praying for your ministry and look forward to what God is doing for you. So God bless, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Man Up God's Way podcast. Visit us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, and our website at manupgodsway.org.